Hello, welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is December 12th. It is week 15 of the NFL season. 4 weeks to go. The season is flying by. It is Jaguars week, and today, to break down all angles of this matchup from a Jaguars perspective, we are joined by Jaguars beat reporter Travis D. Holmes. Travis, thanks so much for coming on. How's it going, man?
Oh man, I appreciate you having me. It's always a good time when we can when we can get together for this. I guess I don't even know what to call it. I can't call it a rivalry, but let's just call it the Trevor Lawrence slash Zach Wilson rivalry. Yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It feels like this week is kind of like the tank bowl in a way, a little bit here. 2, 3, and 10 teams battling it out. Jaguars right now fifth in the draft according to Tankathon. Jets sitting with the seventh overall pick. So, what are your thoughts on both these teams so far this season?
Whew. Um, if I could put it into a meme, it would absolutely be the Spider-Man guys, just pointing to each other. Like both of these teams are severe, like they have some serious core issues that they kind of have to get around, and for two different reasons. Oddly, like I mean, if you're going to talk about the Jaguars' core issue would seem to be their general manager and their offensive coordinator. So, and whether you want to say the offensive coordinator's head coach Doug Peterson, or you want to say that's Press Taylor, because they kind of do this flip flop thing where you don't know who's actually calling the plays on an individual play by play basis. So we'll just say both of those guys. The Jacksonville Jaguars don't have an identity. So overall, that's their biggest issue is you don't know who they are, and offensively, they just can't move the ball because they don't have any real identity as far as running the ball, as far as the strategy and the schemes of running the plays. And if you want to get into the reason I say it's a Spider-Man meme kind of thing for the Jets, it feels the same way, except it's not actually on the offensive coordinator. I consider Aaron Rodgers to be the
Mhm.
offensive coordinator for the Jets at this juncture. Um, you guys seem to call a play. I mean, I looked at every single pass attempt for him this season so far, and it feels like half of the plays he's doing his whatever you want to call it, hot route, sight adjustment, audible, whatever you want to phrase it,
Yeah.
into an isolation route down the sideline where you're getting more of those 50-50 balls or back shoulder fades. And you guys might actually have a good concept drawn up like a mesh or a bench or a stick route, whatever. And he's not even looking at any of those other routes in the middle of the field. It just seems to be all ISO, kind of the same thing that got Mike McCarthy fired in Green Bay. It's just he needs that structure and he doesn't like to play with it. So, unfortunately, for both of these offenses, they don't seem to have any identity. And that seems to be the biggest struggle for both of them. Just offensively, they're not great. But at least the Jets have a good above average defense. Like, I'll give you guys that. Jacksonville's is first in the league at this current moment in time. So, in summary, that's kind of what we're looking at. Jacksonville has problems on both sides of the ball. The Jets just seem to have problems on offense.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way, and I totally agree with your assessment there of the Jets as well. From an offensive perspective, I think the whole Rodgers offense, the way he runs things offensively, is just so outdated.
Mm.
Um, I change play callers mid-year, part of the coaching change. That was a major disaster. The whole Salah firing, go to Ulbrich. Ulbrich's been so in over his head. Obviously, Todd Downing's taken over play calling, hasn't gotten much better. And just from that perspective, like talk about the coaching, talk about, the Jets already moved on from Salah. They've already moved on from general manager Joe as well. What do you feel is the future here for Doug Peterson? Do you feel he is out at the end of this season? Do you feel he's basically done or just waiting? And if so, who do you potentially like to come in here and try and get this team moving forward?
Yeah, man, that sun's getting low, big guy. I think we're getting there. I mean, I've been there for a few
Mhm.
weeks.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my belief was that Doug was aware that he's done at the end of the season. I think that's just kind of riding this
Yep.
thing out because Shad Khan, the owner of the Jaguars, it just feels like one of those guys who is not going to pay you to sit at home. That's the only reason he
Mhm.
hadn't been fired after the 46-point loss before the bye week against the Detroit
Yeah.
Lions. Uh, that was the time to get him out of the door. And at that point, because it didn't happen, the writing's on the wall for Doug Peterson. There's still coin flip on the general manager, Trent Baalke, who I think equally deserves to be out of the door, just to be clear on this.
Yep.
I mean, this is one of the big reasons that we even have Trent Baalke or had Urban Meyer before Doug Peterson. So that's another very big piece of this puzzle that kind of gets skimped over. And those in Jacksonville, those in Duval County, Florida, are kind of just truly in angst, trying to figure out what is going to happen with Trent Baalke at the end of this season, and whether or not it's going to be a full clean slate, on Black Friday, or if it's just going to be Doug Peterson out of the door and us getting another coach who's willing to work with Trent Baalke, like another Matt Eberflus or maybe a Mike Vrabel or one of those,
Yeah.
retread kind of situations. So unfortunately, that's where we are with Doug. It's pretty obvious that he's kind of just riding this bad boy out, but the team seems to be weirdly playing hard. They just don't seem to have, like I said earlier, they don't have a scheme to just score points. They're playing
Mhm.
without Trevor Lawrence, who's been placed on IR with his concussion and his AC joint, issue. And with Mac Jones playing, they just can't score 21 plus points. They've scored 20 points as the high, and most of those games they're scoring 7 to 10. So playing against a really good Jets defense that fourth in the league in defensive yards surrendered, I don't know how to feel about that. That's going to be a very interesting game unless you can have the ability to run the ball, which the Jaguars also don't have.
Yeah.
26 in rushing.
Yeah, like we were saying earlier, definitely two very similar offenses haven't really been able to do a whole lot this season, and offenses too that have some talent sprinkled in, just haven't been able to do much with it. Now, I want to talk a little bit more too about just the whole coaching thing. You mentioned Trent Baalke.
Yeah,
I guess obviously still unknown whether or not he will return. What does like your gut
right.
tell you if you had to make a prediction? Do you feel he returns? And then just what are some guys, like some coaching candidates that you potentially like?
Okay.
Or maybe even Jacksonville maybe likes to come in here? Do they want that young offensive coordinator, the Ben Johnson? Do they want that proven guy, like you said, maybe a Mike Vrabel? From a Jet fan perspective, Vrabel's at the top of my list. I think you need a no nonsense type guy to come in here that's been here,
Mm-hmm.
done that, change this culture. We've seen it now over and over again. First time coordinators do not survive in this market. How do you feel that kind of translates from a Jacksonville perspective?
So Jacksonville has been very, I can't say good, and I don't know if the right term is even bad, but they've been consistent on making sure to hire the guys who are essentially the ones who give you cover. That's the way I kind of categorize it, because
Yep.
in my personal opinion, and this is only my opinion, not those of BigCatCountry.com, uh,
Mhm.
is that the Jaguars seem to make hires based on whether or not they have cover uh, for the hire. So, like, basically, that the hire has to make sense, if that makes sense. If you hire Doug Peterson, no one's going to riot in the streets because he has a Super Bowl. So you can
Yep.
do that, and it makes total sense. You hire an Urban Meyer, and if it flames out, well, no one's going to ride in the street because you tried, you shot for the stars and you missed because the guy just kind of was end up being literally one of the worst NFL
Yep.
coaches in history. That's unfortunate, but we tried. And
Yeah.
because of them showing that consistency with Shad Khan and with Trent Baalke as it currently stands, I kind of have to believe that if they're going to stay in that same thing, like, and billionaires generally are guys who don't change, like they are who they are because they think it makes them successful. And if that's true, then I'm thinking that they're going to go with someone like, I'm happy Bill Belichick's off the market.
Yeah.
That would have been one of the top guys on my list because they have a relationship with the Khans, with Tony Khan while he's running AEW and with Shad Khan. But someone like a Mike Vrabel, yeah, that makes sense. That sounds right. He's not a Super Bowl coach, but he's absolutely a guy who's a culture setter, who was able to have a team that's always going to play above the X's and O's. They're always going to be a hard hitting defense and establish the run game. Kind of one of those fundamental coaches. But if it's not one of those guys, for the most part, the rest of the guys in this bucket of coaches, you're talking Ben Johnson, Detroit Lions offensive coordinator. You're talking Liam Cohen, Tampa Bay
Yeah.
offensive coordinator. Again, these are first time head coaches. Jaguars just haven't shown a willingness to kind of go for those guys. They had Byron Leftwich in the door in the same interviewing cycle as Doug Peterson, and rumor tells it they offered Byron Leftwich the role, but he asked for a new general manager. And they
Interesting.
said they were unwilling to do that, and they basically kind of hit a line in the sand moment where they just kind of just pulled back the contract and said we can't do this. That's the rumor. So because of that, there's this whole Ben Johnson conversation. Will the Jaguars have they learned from that situation? Would they be
Yeah.
willing to give a Ben Johnson, first time head coach, true authority over the general manager, essentially, to pick his own general manager with a thing that they would not allow Byron Leftwich to do? Whew, that's a tough conversation.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that is the this is the guy who we're hearing that they're at least doing their research on. You're talking Ben
Yep.
Johnson, you're talking Liam Cohen, Todd Monken, Baltimore Ravens, Baltimore's offensive coordinator,
Yep.
Mike Brable, Aaron Glenn, the Detroit Lions defensive coordinator. So like the top guys on a lot of people's lists, but most of these guys are first time guys. And
Yep.
I'm curious how that's going to land again for the exact same reasons I just mentioned earlier. The Jaguars just haven't shown a willingness to take those risks. They're one of those, if you're investing, one of the big, I'm just going to invest conservatively and down right down the middle and hope
Yep.
that it land like that's them. And these are coin flips, honestly. They're
Yep.
Bitcoin. We don't know where they're gonna land.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with your point too, just about the whole coaching, um, really the whole coaching bucket. Like you said, as a whole, like you've got Mike Vrabel, proven guy. You even got Brian Flores potentially has already coached. Kingsbury has already
Oh, can
coached.
can I
You know,
let me get your thoughts. I need your thoughts. I
Mhm.
need your thoughts. Brian Flores, do you believe with the lawsuit and everything else that another team's going to give him a real opportunity to kind of do that?
Yeah, it's interesting, and that like the whole Flores thing, and even Gruden's been a name that's been thrown around by Jets fans. He's suing the NFL, so both those guys I feel like kind of fall into the same category of
Yeah,
how does that go down with the NFL? Woody Johnson, the owner, just like does he kind of force it?
bingo.
So it's interesting. I like Flores a lot. I know the way it ended in Miami was ugly, but
Same.
like I like him a lot. You look at what he's done in Minnesota. That defense is nasty. I mean,
Hmm.
just a they're awful to play
Talk
against. I
talk
mean,
about a culture
yep,
setter.
yep, exactly. And I also think too he's got a very huge chip on his shoulder, and I like
Hmm.
that, especially in a division coming from Miami. So I'd be right on board with that. Now, I know the Jets have a history with Miami. Of course, Gaze was a 2-year dumpster fire, but I think Flores is totally different from Gaze. But Flores would be another name, but you make a good point. The whole lawsuit, same thing with Gruden suing the NFL. Those are two things that could stand in the way, which is where it feels like Vrabel is the only I guess fully clean
True.
candidate where has got none of that stuff going on. Kingsbury as
Hmm.
well. I don't love Kingsbury because his teams always fall off second half of the seasons.
Hmm.
Um, I also think he's very happy in Washington. I don't know if he's going to want to jump away from that after just one season with Daniels. I think he's
Bingo.
got something special there. I think he could potentially build his value up even more if he stays with Daniels another year. Um, so yeah, and then you get into, like you said, you Liam Cohen, you got Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn was
Hmm.
former Jet defensive coordinator. Mentioned a couple years ago how the Jets would be his dream job. Could he be a name not only for the Jets but for another team? And even Ray Agnew, their assistant GM, could be a name where maybe Ray Agnew gets
Right.
hired, and then you bring in a Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, and try and go the whole Detroit Lions route because they've all of a sudden now in just 3 years turned their franchise into one of the model organizations in the NFL with Holmes and Dan
Hmm.
Campbell. So
Hmm.
it'll be really interesting. And you make a good point just about Jacksonville and their track record with coaching staffs, and I agree. It felt like Belichick probably would have been. You think he would have been near the top of the list? You think
This is
from?
an argument. This is an argument that I've been having with
Yeah.
so many freaking people. I mean, media. We're talking players. We're talking just across the board because everyone
Hmm.
has their own opinion of where this would have landed. But you've seen the national media kind of talk about that even before Belichick was hired. That Jacksonville felt like one of the few places where Belichick would have been able to get the power that he would have been requesting. Having to be able to pick his own GM. But now
Yeah.
we're still hearing those exact same rumors surrounding Ben Johnson. So it's like, wait,
Yeah.
are they really all in on this process no matter who the coach is? Was that not a Belichick specific thing? Whew,
Hmm.
that will be interesting if that's the way it goes down because again, most teams don't do it that way. They have the general manager or an EVP, or
Yeah.
EVP, general manager, head coach. Now you're saying you're going to have the head coach be above the general manager,
Yeah.
a first time head coach
Yeah.
be above the general. I mean, most of these guys you're talking to first time head coaches. That will be curious.
Yeah.
So I want to be a fly on the wall in this situation because this is truly new territory. Just having these types of conversations about the structure of the Jacksonville Jaguars, front office just changing in that way because Shad Khan came into this thing not being a football guy. He came
Yeah.
just being a general billionaire, and you've seen him learning the process. And this is just a hope that he's learned.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're in the same boat, and he's just going with Mike Vrabel, and Mike Vrabel's going to be the GM. And I'm like, I don't know what the GM Mike Vrabel looks like. I
Yeah.
don't know what kind of team that I know they're going to hit hard, but I don't know if they're going to pass the ball.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you make a good point. And even too, season hasn't totally ended yet. Are there other names that maybe come out? Does Shanahan lose his job in San Francisco?
Right.
If he does, that would be an automatic. Every team in the NFL almost would be jumping on him. You've still got, Stefanski in Cleveland. I don't think he'll go, but you never know. It always feels like there's that one surprise firing like every year, or just about every year. So
yeah, in KC.
yeah,
He's not a name I've really been hearing about, but I thought that was an interesting one, especially what they've done over these past 2 seasons on that defense.
Yeah, yeah, and I've heard too. Matt Nagy was linked to the Jets. I want nothing to do with Matt Nagy. I think he's Gase 2.0. Like that's just the guy that for all those years in Gase was in Denver, it was just Peyton Manning. Christopher Johnson, gets the call from Peyton Manning and says, you got to hire this guy. They hire him, and he gets 9 wins in 2 years, and it was a disaster from the jump. They were flying planes over MetLife saying fire Gase. So
if
that was
you guys get Matt and Nagy, I will feel so bad for you, but I will be laughing for a week. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be honest. That will be insane.
That would be brutal. It would be brutal. Him or Arthur Smith was another name that was linked, or a dark horse, I think they put it. But no way. I can't do Matt Nagy. I'm not doing Arthur Smith, even Steve Spagnuolo. I think he's good as a defensive coordinator. I would entertain Stefanski. I'd be on board with that from Cleveland if he got fired. Would 100% be on board with Shanahan, although the only problem with that is the way they did Robert Saleh and Mike LaFleur here. 2 guys he's very close with. Would he want to come here after that? So it's very interesting.
So you mentioned them to Saleh. I need your opinion of this, just because again, Jaguars. I don't pay close attention to you guys, but I've had this conversation with multiple people this week, and I just wanted someone on the who actually pays close attention to this team to tell me your opinion of the Saleh situation. Was that a fair situation? Was that a rightful firing? How do you feel about it?
I think they should have moved on. I think they did it way too late. I think in typical Jets fashion, they were way too late. To me, the Jets fan base was very split last year. Like this time of year last year, there was 50-50 split. It's still kind of split now. Bring back Rodgers, don't bring back Rodgers, who they hire. But last year, I was totally on board with moving on from Saleh, moving on from this coaching staff, even if it meant Aaron Rodgers leaving. Because to me, the whole Aaron Rodgers timeline got messed up 4 snaps in. As brutal as that is, it got messed up 4 snaps in. We knew he wasn't going to be the same player as a year older. We saw the problems in his coaching staff, the problems on the offensive coaching staff last year come out. And Rodgers, we know, couldn't cover that up. So to me, I would have fired Saleh after last season. I think you could have made the case. You could have moved on from him in 2022. This was a team that was 7-4. They lost 6 straight games to end the season. You could have made the case to move on from him then. He's an excellent defensive mind. We've seen the defense drop off since he's left. I think he's a great defensive coordinator. I think he can be a good coach elsewhere, maybe. I just don't think in this market. After a while, the media started to eat at him. You could tell in his press conferences, he was, you could tell this media started to wear him down, which unfortunately happens a lot in this market. That's why it takes a certain breed, in New York. I would have done it last year. 5 games in, I was on board with it at that moment, but hindsight 2020, they probably should have just kept him the entire year. I think they probably would have been, I don't know, maybe a 5-win team, 6-win team. I don't think they would have been much better right now, but
you wouldn't have been eliminated from the playoffs.
No, yeah, we would have still had a chance. We might have had a win out, but we still would have had a chance. And I loved the Salah hiring. I loved it. I thought he was a culture guy, CEO guy. And maybe it was because Gaze was so bad, no matter what they did, we were going to be on board with it. But the energy and everything he brought in Sam Fram, like from day one, he walked into the building. He was in over his head. That's kind of how I felt about it. Like, you never saw that energy on the sideline. The accountability feels like players came out and said, I think Richard Sherman said it once, because, he played in San Francisco late in his career there, about, him holding players accountable and the respect. And I just don't think that really happened here. I think he came to the Jets and turned more into like more of a, I don't know, laid back guy that was a little overwhelmed. So that's how I viewed the Salah situation, but it's highly debated amongst Jets fans whether or not they should have fired him during the season. It could have been avoided if they just moved on from last year, or you just kept them. But either way, they were all gone at the end of this season. So we were all going to get to the same point, I guess.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And my outsider viewpoint was always that the anchor that held this team down was going to be Aaron Rodgers. It was always that thought process, because I'm a big Matt LaFleur guy. I played for Matt LaFleur at Northern Michigan University. He was our offensive coordinator.
Oh, wow.
I've always thought he was just head above shoulders, just that dude as far as calling plays, as far as his mind for football, as far as figuring that out. And he gave Aaron this great system, and Aaron, frankly, like a child, just kind of kicked and screamed his way out of the system that was doing well for him, because he wanted to run this whole thing that he's doing right now. The same thing they got, again, McCarthy fired, is I want to run all these checks out of your plays. I think I'm the better offensive coordinator, and I'm going to get out of 30%, 50% of the plays that you call. Yep. And I was legitimately watching the tape of Rodgers this year. I was banging my head against, just because it's all ISO routes. It's everything's outside of the hashes. These lower percentage throws, back shoulder phase, or just straight go routes. And I'm just like, dude, just run the play. Lord, just run the play. They actually have good plays drawn up. Just run the play.
Yeah.
So because of that, that's the reason I'm kind of like, ugh. You were going to have a problem, and he's Salah's a defensive coach.
Yeah.
Whereas that's not the offense is just not his forte. So what do you do with the guy who's being your main problem is just your quarterback?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's tough, man.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I was all in on the Rodgers thing. I was open to Derek Carr back in 2023 when it was all going down, but when they got Rodgers, I was all in. I got a Rodgers jersey. Believe me, I'm not gonna be one of those fans and have a revisionist history of saying, oh, I never wanted this guy. I wanted him. I was at the home opener when he tore his Achilles. I was even at the home opener this year against the Patriots, where I was walking out of that building thinking to myself, yeah, this team's winning 12 games. And here we are. We'd be lucky if we hit 5 this year. But I'm so done with Rodgers. I'm so done with him. I want no part of him in 2025. You've got to start fresh. They've got Tyrod under contract next year. Bring in a bridge quarterback, draft a quarterback if you have the high enough pick, have him sit here, have a bridge quarterback that's significantly less baggage, much cheaper, and just restart. Another thing,
you're getting to a point. If you let the Jaguars win, I mean, let the Jaguars win. If you show up to the game and beat the Jaguars, maybe we'll be willing to, give you a nice little trade. Yeah. Let's do this.
Get rewarded for the win 2 times. Get a win, and you get to trade up.
Here.
Yeah,
right here.
I would be totally on board with that. Another thing with Rodgers too is, and you were saying how you're watching the film and stuff. The delay of games are just crazy. I mean,
but that's something he's done that for years.
Oh, for years, and he's never adjusted.
Someone posted a stat about it. He's been top of the league in pre-snap penalty, delay games, and it was delay games, false starts. It was some combination of basically pre-snap penalties where he's been top of the league, and it was, I don't know if it was 7 out of 9 years, but it was something like 7 out of 9, 7 out of 10, something along those lines. And I was like, dang. So it is him.
Yeah.
It's just him, because he's doing all these movements. He's trying to control the whole offense. He's kind of being that OC on the field, and it's just it worked for Peyton, but it's not working for Aaron, man. It's just not.
No, not at all. Not at all. And his ego, I think, has gotten in the way of this whole situation. He thought he could come in here, overcome this coaching staff, basically be the guy. And unfortunately, he's learned, similar to a lot of other players, that it's a lot harder to turn this organization around than
Right.
just
He's Jordan. He's
yeah.
Jordan. He's LeBron. He's all these
Yep.
guys who think that they can be the person
Yep.
that's kind of in charge and running the show. And then when they get into that role to actually make these
100%.
decisions, it goes bad. I'm a great player. I'm just not the great executive I thought I was. That's
Yeah.
all.
100%. You're spot on with that. Um, just some other things on the Jaguars here before we get to,
Yeah.
or Jaguars offensively before we get to their defense.
Okay.
Brian Thomas Jr. has been one of the bright spots for this team this season.
That
He's
guy.
been great pickup. Obviously draft rookie this season. I believe this weekend he can set Jaguars rookie receiving record. So you'll have two young wideouts that'll be out there. Garrett Wilson, who's on pace for his third straight 1,000-yard season. I don't know how he does it with
Mhm.
the quarterback play he's been given, but he's found a way. Same thing with Brian Thomas Jr. He had Trevor. Now he's dealing with Mac Jones. He's still finding ways to put up numbers. Been one of the lone bright spots. What have you seen from him this year? And like you were mentioning, an offense that's obviously been struggling.
I mean, Brian Thomas Jr., he's that guy, man. I love this dude. Like, he is,
Mm-hmm.
because he's not generally the guy who's just going to demand the ball until
Yep.
we got later into the season. And I say that that's not who he was earlier in the season. And you've seen his matriculation, his like he's maturing throughout the season. Just from early training camp, it was to a point where like everyone, I'm talking fans, I'm talking to former players on the sideline at practice, and we're just like, dude, he's when he gets it, oh boy, it's going to be great. It's going to be nice because there were
Yeah.
always a few small things like maybe I would like him to be a little bit more aggressive off the line here. I would like for him to tell the quarterback, get in his ear, tell him when he's open, kind of these things that we're now starting to hear coming from the locker room. Matt Jones just earlier this week says, hey, I love the fact that he's in my ear telling me to get him the ball, get him involved,
Yep.
which is odd because the coaching staff is not doing it.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
Uh, like this past game, this past week against the Titans, like Brian Thomas Jr. had his first catch with 4 minutes, I believe, and 20 seconds left in the third quarter, and I'm just sitting there like, what in the what are you
Yeah.
guys doing, man? Like, what is happening? And then he gets 4 catches in a row, 4 plays in a row. But I'm just like, why is it taking this long to get your obvious number one receiver involved? So he's doing all this. Brian Thomas Jr. He's what is it? He's one touchdown. I had the stat pulled up, and I'm sorry, I just lost it when my screen refreshed. But actually there it is. There it is. Yeah, he has 851 receiving yards on the season, so he's 15 yards away from breaking the Jaguars franchise rookie record. That was back in 2012 by Justin Blackman. Uh, 10 more catches, he's going to get Justin Blackman's records again for a rookie of
Mm-hmm.
64 catches on the season, and he's currently tied with Alan Hearns for the Jaguars touchdown catch record. So he's probably going to get all of these. He will effectively be the best rookie receiver in Jacksonville Jaguars history, more likely than not, over the next 1 to
Yep.
2 games. And we'll just see where that places him, throughout the all NFL receivers. I mean, he may just be
Yep.
a top 2 or top 3 receiver in the NFL by the end of the season with Mac Jones throwing him the ball and the Jaguars offense not actually featuring him. That's the
Yeah.
craziest part of all this.
Yeah.
12 targets and not being featured. He literally got 0 catches outside of the 2 scoring drives in the third and the fourth quarter for the Jaguars. That's craziness.
Yeah. Yeah. You make a great point there with, obviously not featuring him. It's him still finding ways to put a production. And it's kind of very similar just to, on the topic of the Jets as well, like Garrett Wilson, his
Mhm.
first 2 years and even this season, there's times where he'll be running wide open. They don't look his way. He's obviously dealt with a lot of bad quarterback play, and yet he still's
Yeah.
putting up big time numbers. I forget exactly how far he's away. I think he's like 12 receptions or something like that away from
Mhm.
being just the second Jets receiver in history to hit 100 receptions on a season. Brandon Marshall did it back in 2015. That was the only one. So yeah, two really good young receivers, and obviously Brian Thomas Jr. feels like he can only get better from this year, where he'll have more consistent quarterback play, ideally a better coaching staff, next year.
Mhm.
So that'll be definitely beneficial for him. Now, I wanted to move on to the defense. Just, I guess first,
Mhm.
what have been your overall thoughts on that unit this season?
There has not been a worse. Um, how much time you got, buddy?
Yeah.
This is a problem. Like the Jaguars defense, as much as I say the Jaguars offense is a problem, the Jaguars defense is equally up there as just being problematic. Like they brought in a new defensive coordinator, Ryan Nielsen from the Atlanta Falcons last season. He was one of the top guys who was just insane that he was available, but obviously because the coach in Atlanta got fired,
Yeah.
and they brought in a new guy. It makes total sense, but the thought process, the logic was, all right, he just did this with this Atlanta Falcons defense that had very little talent up front. He did it rotating guys, rotating, the defensive line like 30% to 60% of the snaps, often rotating your linebackers. It was such an odd system and it worked. And guys was just like, oh man, he's doing all these interesting things and running 3-4 fronts and then 4-3 fronts and then over fronts and under fronts and all this play
Mhm.
by play. All right, this is going to be cool. Awesome. Here you go, Ryan Nielsen. Come on in. And it just didn't work, man. Like they went from being a 90% plus zone team in 2023 to what we're talking over 70%, second in the league in man coverage for the Jaguars. Also first in the league in cover two, which was just an odd thing because it's not something that we've seen from Ryan Nielsen at all. It just came out of nowhere kind of thing. And it's been odd because again they went from an all zone to basically an all man team, and they've struggled so significantly. Like I'm talking 32nd in the league in total EPA
Mhm.
from passing as far as the secondary is concerned, 32nd in defensive yards surrendered, 28th in points surrendered, 32nd in takeaways. Like we are
Yeah.
talking, these are all the major stats for a defense, and you
Yeah.
are, whoo, I mean, not just like a little bit, like you're toward the cellar at this point.
Yeah.
And I don't really have an answer other than like some of the personnel situations are kind of just weird for sure. And that's a Trent Baalke conversation. We know we don't think he's a great evaluator of talent, but also Ryan Nielsen still does this rotation thing even when he has great players like Travon Walker, like Josh Hines Allen, 8.5 sacks and 7 sacks individually. He's we have the Mason Smith second round draft pick for the Jaguars, who is in a healthy scratch for two of the first 5 games.
Yeah.
No one, no, for no reason. And then he's gotten the most snaps these last 2 weeks and had the best games of the season these
Yeah.
last 2 weeks. And we're just like, dude, what were you doing earlier in the year? We don't understand it. And if you getting these outcomes and you're still getting these weird little rotation things this seems to be a quirk that we thought was a benefit in Atlanta, and it just seems to be a quirk of his. It just feels like everybody's got to go. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's kind of where we are. But they have the talent, man. They have Tyson Campbell balling out of control when he's not injured. When he's on the field and he's healthy, he is. You're probably talking the top 5 and maybe top 10 cornerback in the NFL. And
Yeah.
he just doesn't get that credit because he deals with soft tissue injuries and things like that. But when he's on the field, it's a lot like Fred Taylor. When he's on
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
field, he's one of those top guys. He just has to stay on the field more consistently. Josh Hines Allen, we already talked about him. Trayvon Walker, I know everybody's always comparing him to Hutchinson. He's not Hutchinson, but he's a way better run stopper than Hutchinson. And he
Yeah.
also gives you a lot in the pass rush game. So he in 8.5 sacks, he's probably going to have another 10 sack season. Like this team has foundational pieces, and it's just not working with the scheme. With the scheme,
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about. And the
Yeah.
holes that they have are big holes. They added Ronald Darby at cornerback this season, and he has just not been working out. Like it's to the point where
Mhm.
Ronald Darby, who I believe was an undrafted free agent, has gotten 50% of his snaps now. We're at that point, and he's been playing well. But yeah, so we're getting to a point where we're just evaluating what we have on the cupboard for the future. But it's not worked because a little bit because of Nielsen, a little bit because of personnel. But it just lets you know that everybody kind of has to go because it's just not working.
Yeah, you mentioned Hines Allen and Walker. Feels like two of probably their most talented guys up there on that defense up front.
Whew.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and definitely will be an interesting matchup that I'm looking for on Sunday is Hines Allen against Olu Fashanu, Jets rookie left tackle. I think that'll be a matchup to look for. Um,
Can I get your thoughts? I want to hear some about
mhm.
Hassan Reddick, and I mean I know
Oh,
that's not been working. It's not been working, and
no,
I have all I'm scratching my head as far as why.
it he well the it's been a disaster. The whole defensive line actually is a whole other thing in itself.
Really?
What Joe Douglas did to the defensive line is a fireable offense in its own. They were one of the best units in the NFL last year and completely tore it down. and basically put all their eggs in the Hassan Reddick basket. And he was holding out, obviously, the whole contract dispute, but he missed the first 7 games. He played well against Houston in that Thursday night game on Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
That was our last win. So
Yep.
it's been a while, but it's just, to me, for Reddick, it feels like he's just like a step slow because even his pressures aren't up. It's not like this is a guy that is getting to the quarterback, getting around the quarterback, getting pressures and just not finishing. Even his pressures are down. Sacks are down. He's only got a half a sack since joining the team. Like I mentioned, after missing the first 7 weeks. So to me, it's just like he's never really had much of an opportunity to knock the rust off. And that's only him to blame because he missed all of training camp and missed the entire season. There's one thing of everybody always talks about it. One thing is being in football shape. Or one thing is being in shape. It's another thing to be in football shape. I just think at this point he's so like unmotivated. He's so the team's eliminated. He's out of here at the end of this season.
So
he hasn't
he's
proved,
not back.
Yeah, no, he's definitely. I don't want him back. I think next year you're probably looking at a guy that's, he went from potentially becoming one of the top edge rushers pay wise if he played well this season, if he just stuck it out for an entire year, to looking maybe at a bridge contract next year to try and prove himself again. So,
jeez,
he's been
okay.
Yeah, he's been.
Okay, well, I know us folks in Jacksonville, we've been always salivating at the idea of of Quinnen Williams or the thought of that. So Reddick hasn't been balling, and I know you just mentioned the play of the defensive line, and that's been kind of something that my eyes on is how well this defensive front plays. Do you guys play like the last 4 games, or do you play more like that Houston Texans game when you had CJ Stroud under pressure literally the whole game, had him shook kind of back there? That's kind of what my question is walking into this game, because again, this defensive front is kind of what, if your ability to win, this is where it's going to come. It's going to come because you guys have a game closer to that Houston Texans game where the offense just can't move the ball. They just can't do anything. They can't. I mean, you're kind of just stuck. You're stuck in mud, and that's what my concern is for the Jaguars' offensive line, because we can't run the ball already. We kind of established that already, and your defensive front kind of just can peel their ears back. And maybe this is the week for Reddick to all of a sudden just stack it up and try to get a few of these sacks, or Williams, and we'll see what our offensive tackles look like. It sounds like our right tackle, Anton Harrison, will be playing this week because it's over his illness that kept him out of last game. But I'm just curious because, again, it's offense. Your defensive front feels like a strength versus our offensive line. But if you're telling me that they're not playing great, then that maybe makes me feel a little bit better about the outcome of the game.
Yeah, I would say, just from the first part, obviously, like, I would say it's from the Jets defense line perspective. So the last 4 games is what they're more so like. Michael Clemens hasn't been much of their Javon, terrible free agent signing for Joe Douglas. He was supposed to come in here and kind of fill the role of what Quentin Jefferson was last year. In terms of that Houston game, the Jets defensive line this year, they've had like 2 games this season where they've been really, really good. Houston, they had 8 sacks, and then the New England game in week 3, they had 7 sacks. They've got 37 sacks on the season as a whole. 15 of those came in those 2 games. So those 2 games were like 2 dominant games, happens to be 2 of their 3 wins. So I would say expect more of a performance that you've seen out of them the last 4 weeks, which is just not getting home to the quarterback. They just don't have the bodies. Like, Quinnen Williams doesn't have anybody around him. He's got no defensive tackle help. Talk about Reddick, right? You're not getting much on the edge. Jermaine Johnson tore his Achilles in week 2, so he's been missing all year. Clemens is a non-factor. You're looking at an edge rusher and Will McDonald, who's been great this year, 10-plus sacks. That's about it. So they had 2 blow-up games. They had 2 dominant games.
That's crazy to me. Houston. You had 3 guys who I thought were like McDonald. I mean, you got Quentin Williams. Quinnen Williams, and I'm just like, wow, you got one good, really good edge, a really good tackle, Reddick, who's he seems like he's problematic, I guess. I just thought that was a solid start, at least a solid base. So that's just shocking to me a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's disappointing to say the least for what they. That's all I could say. It's just so disappointing. Like they had
It's
JFM, they had
disappointing for
Quentin.
what they could be.
Yeah, exactly. They had JFM, they had Quentin Jefferson, they had Bryce Huff. They traded JFM for nothing. They got rid of Bryce Huff. They let him walk. Quentin Jefferson signed with Cleveland. Then he got released. They could have picked him up mid-year. Then he went to Buffalo, division rival, and he has a sack in his first game. So it's just been one of those seasons for them. The offensive line,
Wait,
however,
right?
last year was
JFM's in Denver, right? He has like didn't he
yes,
have like 6 or 7 sacks?
yeah, he's had a very productive year, and he was a great locker room guy too. I don't think JFM they would be 10-3 right now, but his locker room presence I think is missing. He was a big leader in that room,
Yeah.
which unfortunately is leaderless right now. It feels like so.
Yeah. So overall, yeah, that's the Jaguars' defense is, again, they're
Yeah,
problematic, and we've already kind of just hit on the Jaguars' offense so far. Uh, I mean, but again, both of these teams both have 7 losses.
yep,
Both teams are 7 one-score losses
yep.
specifically. They're both 2-7 in one-score games. That's craziness. Like either of these teams could be 500 or even closer to, if they had the Minnesota Vikings 2023 schedule. I mean, luck, maybe they could have even been in that true playoff push. That it is just insane to me how close these teams are to being, I don't know, at least average, so maybe even above average. And right now it's just all in the cellar for both of them because they can't get out of their own way. It just feels like two badly coached teams, which makes sense with one of the coaches, being fired and the other one seemingly out of the way. But wow, so I'm sorry to bring it down, but it's kind of this is where we are. Obviously, two maybe top 5 teams in the draft. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely feels like that. Feels like maybe a potential, like I said in the open, potential tank bowl game here. Maybe the winner of this. Maybe Jets win, trade with you guys in April, so we make it a
yeah.
win-win there.
Well,
Like you were
thank you,
mentioning.
Brees Hall got the memo. He understood the
Yeah,
assignment.
yeah,
He didn't practice
yeah,
today, Thursday. So, I said today. Sorry, pre-recording. Yeah. So he didn't practice. So it's quite possible that he may not play. Meanwhile, the Jacksonville Jaguars, Evan Ingram didn't practice on Thursday. So we'll see what that looks like. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence is already on injured reserve. So, maybe both teams will be down. Maybe one solid player. We'll see what happens with DJ Reed. Also, he has a groin, and he went from limited to
yeah,
did not practice on Thursday. Also, so it's quite possible that the Jets may be down a corner too.
yeah,
We'll see what that happens.
yeah, yeah. And Sauce missed last week as well, though. Looks like he will be out there this week, but
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
two teams that are banged up for sure. Uh, this point in the year, with the way the
yeah.
season's going for both teams, definitely expect some of those guys that would maybe push it if they were in the playoff race to kind of just sit back
Bingo.
and not risk anything, So
Bingo.
uh,
But I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to happen now. What the
yeah,
outcome's going to look like because Mac Jones is 5-0 against the New York Jets,
yeah,
which is just
yeah,
crazy. Because it's not like he's balling. If you look at his game by game stats in those 5
hmm
games, it's like he hasn't scored a touchdown in 2 of them. Just around
yeah,
200 yards passing, just kind of game manager this thing, run the ball, don't turn it over, and win on the edges, win on the margins. And that's kind of who Matt Jones is. If you don't have guys tipping the ball up for interceptions and all these kind of weird things that's been happening these past few weeks for Jacksonville. So it's quite possible that this could be one of those messy, lower scoring games if Matt Jones kind of keeps it clean, uh, where the Jaguars could pull it out. And I would hate for that to happen for the sake of the future GM and head coach, but
yeah,
it's not beyond the realm of possibility if they want to give Tank Bixby, 15, 20 rushes and just kind of let this game be over at 3:30 in the afternoon. I
yeah,
can see something like that happening.
yeah. Definitely would be interesting to see how both teams attack this one for sure. And feels like you said there, great point. Feels like both fan bases in a way are kind of in the same state of mind, just tank mode at this point with the final 4 games. Hey, they're tanking, just running with Tank Bigsby, right? Tank on tank.
Tank and ETN, and the whole Tank Bisbee ETN conversation is another piece that's just been it's been an argument all throughout the fan base because many people believe that Travis Etienne is the guy from 2023, 2022. If you give him a good
Mhm.
blocking lane, if you give him, a good system and where you know how to use him right, he can be one of those Christian McCaffrey, maybe not Christian McCaffrey, but kind of in that vein of I'm going to be a really good pass catcher, but also I can be really explosive, maybe something like a Gibbs. I don't believe he's that person, but I understand what people are looking at, if that makes sense, because statistically he's able to do some of those same things. Uh, but however, they've been treating him more like just a pass catching back, like a third down back. With the emergence
Yeah.
of Tank Bigsby and his ability to break tackles before contact and out of the backfield, the Jaguars have a real problem, in my personal opinion, where Travis Etienne can't pass block. He's just simply too light. It's been
Mhm.
some very bad tape that's kind of been put out there. Whereas Tank Bixby also can't pass block,
Yeah.
and that's a problem because he also has issues catching the ball on third down.
Yeah.
So you just have one guy who's really good at running the ball on Tank Bixby. I mean,
Yeah.
really good. And then you have another guy, Travis Etienne, who's absolutely your best pass catcher out of the backfield. And then you have Dearness Johnson, who's been a healthy scratch the last 2 weeks, who's probably your best pass blocker, but he doesn't give you as much in the run game or the pass game. Like, what do you do with that backfield without tipping your
Yeah.
hand? And that's just one of those weird kind of situations where
Yeah.
they'll have Travis Etienne on the fifth year option in 2025, and we'll see whether or not they keep him for the new head coach or whether or not they move on from him. That's a real interesting question. I personally question whether or not they're just going to bring in another guy to be a full third down back, like a three down back, where they can not tip their hands on plays. But that's my personal opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely something to look for there. Make a good point there. Just about
Hmm.
a lot of
And lost. Yeah. And I think I lost him at
all your
46.
Jaguars there.
Sorry, I lost you for a second there.
Yeah. Do you got me now?
Yeah, I got you now. Yep.
All right. Sorry about that. Internet's kind of cutting out towards the end. Just working. Really appreciate you hopping on the pod. It was a lot of fun. Where can everybody find all your work? Twitter, your articles, all your Jaguars content.
Well, yeah, if you're looking for any Jacksonville Jaguars, my written content, bigcatcountry.com. We have post game write ups, any breaking news as far as injuries and the, press, the different media availabilities for the head coaches and the players. Also, you can find me on the socials, Travis D. Holmes on Twitter, on Blue Sky if you fancy. Facebook, Instagram, all the socials, man. I'm,
Mhm.
I'm here to talk Jacksonville Jaguars football primarily, but I talk all football, whether it's Canadian football, XFL, NFL,
Yeah.
college. Again, I played cornerback for UCF. I'm here to talk all ball, but with a heavy emphasis on the Jaguars because that's who pays the bills.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am a fan of the team, just to be clear. I am an actual born and raised Jacksonville, Florida fan of the Jacksonville Jaguars who is blessed to be able to cover the team also. So yeah, hit me up on the socials. We can talk some Jets football. I promise I won't be disrespectful. I feel for you guys.
Yeah.
You are sort of in that same boat as us. I just hope
Yeah.
you do believe that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah, we're here suffering together, just not
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. It's like a joint therapy session here. Jets, Jags,
Yes, sir.
two struggling teams. But yeah, again, really appreciate you coming on. This was awesome. Definitely check him out. And we'll have a lot more content coming your way as we get closer to this matchup. As always, thank you so much for tuning in.